Police! Police, come out with your hands up!
There's movement on this window right here.
Ring camera footage captured the moment more than a dozen ICE agents raided this Burnsville home.
ICE and DHS just tore open a cartel-run child trafficking pipeline stretching from Mexico to Canada.
Get down on the ground right now! Hands up! Hands up! On the ground!
Rescuing 4 trapped minors, seizing over 3,500 kilograms of cartel contraband, and exposing a network that moved more than 200 migrants across 2 international borders.
New details about a mid-state smuggling operation involving the Mexican drug cartel. Several children are now in the custody of the Department of Children's Services.
And it all started when a teenage girl ran out of a restaurant in a quiet Tennessee town, walked straight into a police station, and said one sentence that detonated a federal investigation. Within hours, local deputies weren't alone anymore.
Officers reported she showed up to the police station and reported being the victim of smuggling and child labor trafficking, leading to a 3-month investigation that led to all of the children being rescued.
ICE agents arrived, Homeland Security followed, and what looked like a small-town abuse case turned into something much bigger. Because as investigators traced how those children got there, they didn't just find smugglers. They found cartel debt ledgers, trafficking routes running through Arizona, weapons caches, and links pointing north, past the US border, into Canada, where an entirely separate cartel operation had been quietly moving migrants by the hundreds. This wasn't one crime scene. It was one node in a continental pipeline. And the moment DHS connected Tennessee to Montreal, agents realized something far more disturbing. That girl didn't just escape her captors. She exposed a cartel system so large, so entrenched, that shutting it down would trigger raids, seizures, and arrests across multiple countries. And once ICE followed the money trail, they uncovered the one piece of evidence that confirmed this ring was never meant to stop at the US border. That's where this story really begins. Smithville, Tennessee, isn't the kind of place where people expect cartel operations. It's a small, quiet town, which is why nobody thought twice about Chabelita's restaurant and market. It looked normal, it sounded normal, and from the outside, it blended in perfectly. Until one night, a teenage girl ran out, walked straight into the Smithville Police Department, and told officers she had been smuggled into the country and forced to work. That single moment changed everything.
The investigation began in September after one of the children ran away and went to the Smithville Police Department, reporting she was being forced to work and controlled. Officers later found 3 other children living alone without adult supervision.
Because once the police started asking questions, the story didn't stop with her. It widened. Officers traced where she had been staying, a house on Bright Hill Road, and what they found didn't make sense. The house was full of adults with no apparent connection to the girl. What's worse, they could not find any paperwork on the girl, nothing to suggest who she was or belonged to. Then they checked another address tied to the same operation. That's where things got worse. At a home on West Broad Street, officers found 3 boys living completely alone with no parents, no guardians, and they weren't enrolled in school. By that point, local police were confident this was a trafficking ring, but they didn't know how wide the operation was yet until they dug deeper. Within hours, the scope exploded beyond Smithville. The DeKalb County Sheriff's Office looped in state investigators. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation stepped in, and then ICE and DHS joined the operation. Search warrants were drafted, surveillance footage was pulled, firearms were seized, and when agents finally moved in on the restaurant and connected properties, the picture became unmistakable. These children hadn't just crossed a border. They'd been moved through Arizona, transported across state lines, and put to work to pay off smuggling debts, a system straight out of cartel playbooks. But here's the part that caught investigators off guard. This wasn't a one-off, because once federal agents followed the trail backward, beyond Tennessee, they realized this escape had exposed something much larger, something that didn't stop at the southern border. And that's when the case took a turn no one in Smithville could have imagined. What investigators uncovered next explained why this case looked the way it did. For cartel-linked smuggling crews, children aren't moved as refugees or family units. They're moved as debt instruments. Here's how it works. A child is smuggled across the border with a price attached: transportation, housing, food, paperwork, protection. By the time they arrive, That bill has quietly grown into an impossible number. And unlike adults, kids can't run, can't bargain, and can't legally work their way out, so that debt becomes leverage.
Authorities say 4 children were forced to work to pay back debt to the Mexican drug cartel after being smuggled from Mexico and eventually brought to Tennessee.
Instead of cash, the cartel extracts labor. The kids are made to work in kitchens, markets, cleaning crews, delivery runs, basically, work long hours with no pay, under constant supervision.
This case centers around this restaurant and market where investigators say children were forced to work after being smuggled into the country.
Every shift is logged not as wages earned, but as interest owed. If they miss a day for some reason, the debt grows. If they complain, the debt grows. Try to leave, the debt follows. That's why small towns are the preferred destination. Here's what former FBI agent Rob Chadwick had to say about it.
Former FBI agent Rob Chadwick, who has investigated human trafficking and cartel networks, says cases like this are not unusual in small communities.
According to Agent Chadwick, places like Smithville are chosen for a reason. Businesses where cash flow is normal and back rooms are ignored. Restaurants and markets that already rely on long hours, immigrant labor, and minimal paperwork. And most importantly,
they tend to prey largely on these small communities for the very reason that these small communities are so, under-resourced from a, law enforcement standpoint.
And it doesn't hurt that these small communities tend to have quiet neighborhoods where kids working late don't raise alarms until one finally does. And even in those cases, the entire structure is designed to collapse inward. Multiple residences, rotating supervisors, no single owner holding everything. By the time local officers realize what they're looking at, the kids are already split up, the paper trail is gone, and the people who matter have moved on. That's why the Tennessee case didn't end with local arrests. Once federal agents stepped in, bringing in U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Department of Homeland Security, they started finding the same debt structures, the same labor arrangements, and the same routing patterns showing up elsewhere. Because moving children wasn't the end goal, it was the currency that kept the operation running. But if moving kids was only part of the business, what's the main business? By the time agents finished processing the Tennessee scene, they realized the kids weren't moved randomly, and they weren't meant to stay, because buried inside seized phones, notebooks, and payment records was something investigators hadn't expected to find in a small-town child labor case. Coordinates, names, and dollar amounts tied to Canada. That trail led north, way north, up to a high-rise condo in Montreal. How did they find out? ICE analysts traced phone data pulled from the Smithville arrests to contacts operating out of Montreal, using short-term rentals and high-rise condos as coordination hubs. Within days, Canadian border authorities were looped in. Turns out Canadian border agents had already been watching the building, but what they didn't know was how closely it connected back to the kids found working in that Tennessee restaurant. And that's when CBSA moved on a condo in downtown Montreal that didn't look like much from the outside. But inside the condo, authorities uncovered handwritten ledgers, not spreadsheets, not apps, but old-school notebooks, listing migrant names, recruiters in Mexico, guarantors on both sides of the border, pickup drivers, and precise payments for crossings. Each entry had dates, routes, and fees, $5,000 here, $6,000 there, all tied to one thing: moving people between Mexico, Canada, and the US like inventory. That ledger didn't just document crossings, it mapped the business. Canadian authorities later confirmed the network had already moved hundreds of migrants through Quebec and into the United States, often rerouting through snow-covered back roads near New York and Vermont to avoid southern border pressure. And here's the part that snapped everything into focus. The same debt bondage model used on the kids in Tennessee was being used on adults crossing the northern border. Smuggle first, charge later, enforce payment with fear. Some migrants were forced to work, others were threatened, and some were told their families back home would pay the price if they talked. When Canadian agents arrested one of the organizers, they found proof the operation had adapted, shifting routes north as U.S. enforcement tightened south, which meant Tennessee wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a continental reroute, and once investigators understood that, they realized something even darker. Moving kids and migrants was only half the operation, because the same routes were being used to move something else, something deadlier, in the opposite direction. By the time DHS analysts stepped back from the Tennessee case files, they weren't looking at a trafficking ring anymore. They were staring at a supply chain, a literal pipeline, because the same crews moving people were also moving product and cash along the exact same corridors. Smugglers handled the bodies, drivers handled the roads, guides handled the woods, financiers handled the payments, and everything moved in parallel. Migrants weren't just being transported for labor, they were being moved alongside fentanyl shipments, coke loads, and cash couriers, sometimes in the same vehicles, sometimes within hours of each other.
Javi told us cocaine from Mexico moves through the United States and into Canada, while fentanyl comes from China and he and other smugglers move it from Canada into the United States.
That's how cartels keep costs down and profits high. One route, multiple commodities, and when pressure increased at the southern border, the pipeline just adapted and moved north. Migrants flowed south, flowed both ways. Cash flowed back up. The US was the market, Canada was the buffer, Mexico was the supplier, and every role was interchangeable. Drivers who hauled migrants one week hauled narcotics the next. Guides who walked families through snowbanks also walked duffel bags. Recruiters sold the journey. Financiers collected the debt. What shocked investigators wasn't the brutality, it was the efficiency. Because every time enforcement cracked down in one place, the routes simply shifted, never stopped. What started with 4 children forced to work in a quiet Tennessee town suddenly lined up with seizures at the northern border, cartel accounting ledgers in Montreal, and coordinated smuggling routes that treated Canada as a staging ground and the United States as the end market. This case was so chilling that it fundamentally changed federal immigration enforcement. Inside DHS, it was reclassified as cartel infrastructure operating on US soil. That shift mattered. Because once investigators confirmed cartel fingerprints, the response escalated fast. This was no longer about paperwork violations or overstayed visas. It was about organized crime, using children as leverage inside the United States. That's why this case triggered immediate coordination across agencies. Local police handed off intelligence. ICE wasn't acting alone. DHS analysts were mapping routes, finances, and contacts tied to the operation. Evidence pulled from homes, businesses, phones, and accounts were entered into broader cartel investigations already active nationwide. What that means is officials began openly describing these cases not as human smuggling, but as cartel logistics. The same pipelines that moved drugs and cash, now confirmed to be moving children too. That reframe came with consequences. It meant more warrants, more subpoenas, more follow-up raids, and far less patience for anyone playing a small role in the chain. Anyone connected, drivers, landlords, recruiters, financiers, was now exposed to federal charges that go far beyond immigration enforcement. And quietly, similar cases across other states were being re-examined through the same lens. Because Smithville didn't stand out for how extreme it was, it stood out for how normal it turned out to be. And that's what made federal agents uneasy. Because once you see how easily this worked in a quiet town, how long it went unnoticed, the question stops being, how did this happen here? It becomes something much harder to answer. How many more places look exactly like Smithville and just haven't been exposed yet? 4 kids were saved in Smithville because one girl ran. She found a police station. But this case wasn't a one-off. It exposed a pipeline that stretches across borders, moving children the same way it moves drugs and cash. For every escape that makes headlines, there are others who never reach a sidewalk, never reach a badge, never reach a place where the story can stop. And that's the question this case leaves behind. If one child hadn't run, how much of this would still be invisible? Please feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth videos like this. Meanwhile, click on any of the cards on your screen right now to watch more of our videos.